Media Manipulation, The Unseen Hand in Political Overthrows. Written by Nitin Sawant. In one of his fiery speeches, Napoleon Bonaparte made a very peculiar comment on the French Revolution. The nobility would have survived if it had known how to master the writing desk. Meaning? Well, Napoleon insisted that the nobility was violently guillotined by the general public because they could not convince the mobs that they served a valuable role. Rather, the media of those days wholly prevailed upon the public on the futility of royal rule. Moral of the story? Media matters the most in realpolitik when your neck is on the line. However, the question remains, is the writing desk sharper than the guillotine? Indeed, haven't we seen the fake hysteria whipped up by the global media outlets on the issue of those non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, ultimately resulting in a noose around the neck of their whipping boy Saddam Hussein? Wasn't the clamor for protecting civilians in Libya basically a facade for the underlying regime change mission to dethrone Muammar al-Gaddafi? More importantly, doesn't the recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump belie the fact that a decade of dehumanizing bile spewed against him in the American media space has led to the radicalization of the deluded youth, one of whom allegedly got hallucinated into pulling the trigger save some lofty democratic ideal? Activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali brands this phenomenon as the Trump derangement syndrome, describing it as the climate created and cultivated by Donald Trump's political enemies. America is polarized, toxic, and politically close to a breaking point in part because the country's liberal political, cultural, and media elite never accepted Trump's legitimacy as the country's president. As you further widen your gaze, what won't escape your attention is the humongous similarities between Laissez-faire Trump and the global left's approach towards demeaning and brutalizing Indian PM Narendra Modi's reign and its fallout. The resemblance in tactics is uncanny, so much so that one can predict how the future Trump presidency will play out in the media if he is re-elected. 34 strands of spaghetti. Let's face it, whatever vitriol that is being viciously sprayed on Donald Trump in 2024 has been thoroughly tested on PM Narendra Modi since 2014. It is so surreal that one might even theorize that the American left media space has learned its tricks of the trade from the Indian left and not vice versa. For starters, look at the standard issue whining template that is commonly followed in all primetime news debates on American TV. If Trump wins an election, that our country will end, our democracy, our constitution will end, it's the last election we'll ever have. Does it ring a bell? This is exactly what Rahul Gandhi, the Congress Party, and their attendant left-liberal cabal have been saying all the time in India since 2014. One might wonder if the global left media is working from a centralized playbook, copying out these speeches and circulating them around verbatim for all democracies. Just like sustained attempts to defame Modi, Trump is facing a barrage of multiple lawsuits, fake media narratives, questionable inquiry commissions, severe dehumanization, and relentless name-calling, equating him with Hitler, fascists, hate-mongers, supremacists, and bigots. Similarly, Trump's detractors have convinced their supporters that everything wrong in their lives is due to Trump, justifying violence against him in their minds. At the same time, even a word against his opponents is considered sacrilegious. Just as PM Modi had to contend with the Ishrat Jahan assassination plot of 2004, the Ahmedabad bombings of 2008, the Putna rally bombing attempt of 2013, the Elgar Paris had Bhima Koregaon conspiracy of 2018, and the Punjab flyover attempt on his life in 2022, Trump now faces a similar onslaught. Speaking of fake manufactured news and narratives, we have already seen how the global left media tried to incite rebellion in India with their one-sided condemnatory reporting against PM Modi, which peaked around May 2024, on the eve of the general election. Similar techniques are now being employed in the ongoing American election campaign. Millions of ordinary Americans who had voted for Trump in the past and might vote for him again were told that they threatened the very foundations of the nation. For the 2 years following that speech, the insistence grew that a Trump election victory would be unacceptable. The lawfare and media campaign against him intensified, aiming to convict Trump of any crime and label him a felon, ensuring a Democratic victory. Consequently, a court in New York found Trump guilty of all 34 charges in a case that legal experts claimed would never have been brought against anyone other than Donald Trump. In essence, 34 strands of spaghetti were thrown at him and all 34 stuck. The intention behind highlighting the toxic similarities in the modus operandi of the global left media is not to endorse Donald Trump or the Republican Party in any manner. Instead, it is to underscore the similarly extensive and vile propaganda being directed against PM Modi, India, and Indians worldwide. Brown coolies, black deeds. Despite many similarities between the Modi and the Trump derangement syndromes, there is one distinctive feature about the anti-Modi narrative. Most of it is concocted by journalists of Indian origin based in the West. By the way, have you read the Aesop tale of the tree and the axe? As it turns out, a man came into a forest and petitioned the trees to provide him with a handle for his axe. The trees consented, but once the man got a new handle for his axe, he promptly began to use it to strike down the very noblest giants of the forest, which provided him with the wooden handle. Moral of the story? Destruction can be fatal when your own lot becomes a tool in the hands of your enemies. Ergo, the global left's perpetual need for brown coolies of Indian origin to rave and rant against India and Indian democracy just to make sure that the fictional fabrication looks like an organic inside job. We have repeatedly covered and fact-checked the slimy reportage of these brown coolies, who never fail to bend backward and trash their own heritage to please their Western masters, just to have a few crumbs thrown at them to validate their existence. But what is amazing about this Modi derangement syndrome is that these infected rabid hacks have now sunk to such inglorious depths in their reporting that they are actually taking down the reputation of their white masters, hitting rock bottom in the process. Take the case of the Washington Post and its alleged tech hack Pranshu Varma. A casual check on the timeline of this bottom feeder betrays his bias, as his so-called reportage is a litany of lament on everything good about India and Indians. Although the Washington Post's jaundiced coverage against all things India is well known and often debunked, their Modi derangement syndrome is making more waves than their coverage. Even India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar never fails to take a dig at the Washington Post's prejudice, making a mockery of their perennial anti-India slant. However, instead of a counter op-ed with a fact-based rebuttal, the Post and its pet brown minion resorted to further degeneracy by targeting social media handles, repeatedly exposing their sham reports. As a part of his hit job against Indian social media handles that have persistently unmasked Washington Post's agenda, Pranshu Varma reached out to an American political commentator, Jack Posobiec, in the hopes of getting some juicy gossip about the Indian handle Disinfolabs, whose posts were evidently shared by Posobiec. "We are doing a story on a group called Disinformation Lab," Pranshu Varma revealed in a direct message. "Our reporting shows this group combines fact-based research with unsubstantiated claims to paint U.S. government figures, researchers, Indian-American human rights activists, and international humanitarian groups as part of a conspiracy, purportedly led by global Islamic groups and the billionaire George Soros, to undermine India. Our analysis found you have retweeted this organization's content," he told Jack Posobiec. And without offering any evidence, he claimed, "Do you know about the organization's background? Our research has found that Disinfolab is actually run by an Indian intelligence officer. Did you know that?" Varma expected Posobiec to rant against an undemocratic India, but his reply practically castigated the half-wits at Walpo's helm and Varma too. So if it's an intel agency-run media outlet that basically makes it the same as the Washington Post, then? Wrote back Posobiec, insinuating Walpo and its minions as lapdogs of American intelligence. As is his wont, Varma slyly sidestepped Posobiec's reply and kept it out of his report, although with Posobiec putting up the entire conversation on Twitter/X, Varma and Walpo were left red-faced again. Disinfolabs further crucified Varma and Walpo's reputation by pointing out how their entire reportage was based on old recycled Pakistani propaganda, with an astonishing 10 anonymous sources, and without a single fact. However red-faced, Walpo is yet to apologize for its bird-brained coverage, and it took another brown sepoy par extraordinaire to bring her employer to its knees, apologizing for their blinkered reporting and blatant bare-faced lies. Meet Avani Dias, the South Asia Bureau Chief of Australian Broadcasting Corporation, whose claim to fame happens to be her unvarnished support of the Khalistani separatist movement, and her propensity to break laws and then cry victimhood. Dias was the apple of every India hater's eye recently, as she brazenly went to town claiming how the Modi government was forcing her to leave India and not allowing her to cover the elections, as her reporting supposedly crossed a line. Her wail went viral within her clique of India haters until a reporter from India Today dug into her story and found it malicious, mischievous, and misleading. Ms. Diaz was found to have violated visa rules while undertaking her professional pursuits. Despite this, on her request, she was assured that her visa would be extended for the coverage of the general elections, and her visa was extended till the end of June the same day. She, however, chose to leave India on April 20th. She had a valid visa at the time of her departure, and her visa extension was approved. It turns out Diaz had crossed a line and stood on the wrong side of the law while her two colleagues at ABC received their due election coverage permission letters. However, Diaz continued remorselessly on her mission to spin yarn in the name of journalism and carried on with her nonsensical stories, this time by fabricating another canard in the name of the Indian Constitution. She made the false claims in a video titled "The Story Behind India's Narendra Modi," with the objective to portray that India's secularism was somehow in danger under the leadership of PM Modi. However, this time, her fanciful conjectures went too far for even ABC News, who had to step in to rescue their tattered reputation and admit that the sweeping claim made by Avani Diaz about secularism being part of the Indian Constitution since 1947 was patently fake. The derangement arrangement. Although we analyzed barely a couple of examples of brown sepoys bringing disrepute to their orgs by trying to tarnish the image of their motherland, the same behavior can be traced across various leftist media spaces in the West, where it seems customary to badmouth India and Hindus as a prerequisite for being part of their cabal. The question remains, just as Indian media orgs step up to debunk the falsities of these global mouthpieces, why don't other reputed international global media orgs come forward to puncture the fake stories put out by some? If Walpo intentionally puts out a hoax of a story on India, why wouldn't the NYT or Wall Street Journal take them on and set them right? The answer is simple. Everyone is a charlatan in the left media space, and they survive by seeking validation from each other. The insularity of American discourse is frightening, says Dr. Kishore Mahbubani, a Singaporean diplomat and geopolitical consultant who served as the president of the United Nations Security Council between 2001 and 2002. He points to the incestuous self-referential discourse among the journalists of NYT, Walpo, Wall Street Journal, and other U.S. media. They reinforce each other's perspectives and end up misunderstanding the world. You might find this hard to believe, but most of these so-called scribes live in an echo chamber of gigantic proportions. Then again, according to a study published in Current Psychology by and Chris Benz and Alex Bertrams, leftist political activists do not actually strive for social justice and equality, but rather use political activism to endorse or exercise violence against others to satisfy their own ego-focused needs. The authors coined a new term for such psychological behavior, the dark ego vehicle principle. According to this principle, individuals with dark personalities, such as high narcissistic and psychopathic traits, are attracted to certain forms of political and social activism, which they can use as a vehicle to satisfy their own ego-focused needs instead of aiming at social justice and equality. In particular, certain forms of activism might provide them with opportunities for positive self-presentation and displays of moral superiority, to gain social status, to dominate others, and to engage in social conflicts and aggression to satisfy their need for thrill-seeking. In other words, the study on left-wing authoritarianism showed that many times they do not practice what they so loudly preach. The research noted that social justice is often used as a guise for these activists to behave unhinged. Chumps like Varma and Diaz are simply show ponies, prancing around to seek some attention. Like their leftist counterparts, their reportage is never about ethics, morals, integrity, honesty, or fair play. Everything they write is a perfect embellishment to your nearest dustbin. And yet, one must never make the mistake of ignoring these parasites, as their consistently discriminatory reportage has been known to incite lunatics into taking up arms against the likes of Trump and Modi. Let them eat fake. Returning to the French royals, one must remember that Marie Antoinette was an elegant and feminine princess. However, the early version of the media slandered her relentlessly. They printed stories and articles vilifying her family and their courtiers with exaggerations, fictitious anecdotes, and outright lies. Worst of all, they made up the lie about her, saying poor people should eat cake. Mind you, Marie Antoinette was a generous patron of charity and was moved by the plight of the poor when it was brought to her attention. thus making the cake statement out of character for her. And yet the media brewed a storm of mob vengeance until it exploded in fury and dragged Marie to be humiliated and murdered. Her last words were pardon for stepping on her executioner's foot before they sliced off her head. Indeed, let's never forget that leftist liberalism has always been steeped in blood. 2.5 centuries ago, they incited the mob against Marie Antoinette. Today, it's the turn of Trump and Modi to face their ire, with their unregulated reportage wrongly pushing some crazed youth into mindlessly picking up the gun. After all, as Friedrich Nietzsche said, liberalism is the transformation of mankind into cattle.